Hi, I'm Simon Jones, here with a look at the first 5 minutes of Deus Ex Human Revolution. As with the previous videos I've done, I'm going to be looking at what the game does to get your attention and deserve your further attention in its first 5 minutes. Now, like I decided with the previous video, which was looking at brothers, I only start the clock once I actually get to an interactive part of the game. Okay, so let's jump into Deus Ex. And at the very start of the game we have a cutscene that comes up, so I'm not going to start the 5-minute timer until after this cutscene. But it's an interesting opening to the game because the very first impression that we get is of this really awfully low quality FMV. This is like something you'd expect from the time of the original Deus Ex. We've got this kind of weird low-res video with this low poly character model and this terrible gamma offset problem where the blacks aren't properly black, and it generally just looks really bad. And the odd thing, especially on PC, is that all the video cutscenes are vastly lower quality than the actual in-game graphics. And that's kind of something that you used to get back in the PlayStation 2 era, because the consoles back then weren't HD. So you were running HD games on PC, and then you'd have a cutscene that was only rendered out to an incredibly old PAL or NTSC resolution. So I don't know quite what was going on with this, because Square Enix have a history of doing great cutscenes, and quite why the technical aspects of this just got completely dropped, I have no idea. As for the cutscene itself, it introduces lots of interesting things. It has a kind of stylistic similarity to some of the introductory cutscenes from the original Deus Ex, but the differences really come in once we finish this cutscene. So we're now fading out with this interesting question. You don't know what's going on. You don't know who that guy was. You maybe recognise the voice actor from the original game, but there's a lot of mystery set up. And then we're into another cutscene. Okay, so we have some news reports setting up some more of the world. And by this point you're starting to get kind of an itchy mouse hand. You know, you want to start doing something. The Deus Ex games are founded upon player agency and having choices and having consequences to your actions, and we're still waiting to actually do anything here. The original Deus Ex started with a cutscene, sure, but then you were thrown in pretty quickly with lots of important decisions that you had to make. You were talking to your brother on the docks at the start of the original, and you have to choose immediately what kind of approach you're going to take to this mission, where you have a fairly violent scenario and you have to decide up front whether you're going in violently or peacefully or what have you. Instead, this game takes a lot of time to do world building, and it introduces a lot of the core characters. And these are all important things to the Deus Ex universe as well, but kind of misses the point at the start. And this is weird because Human Revolution is one of my favourite games. It does a great job of taking what made Deus Ex great and updating it into something fresh and new, and not just kind of slavishly copying or repeating what was done 12 years ago, and not kind of ignoring all that and doing something completely new that ignores that heritage. But while the design of the game is spot on later on, at this point you're really wondering what's happening. Like, are we actually going to get a chance to play this game, or is it going to be a movie for the whole thing? And you know, setting up a scene is all very well and good, but a general issue that Human Revolution has right at the start of the game is that it does far too much telling you stuff rather than just showing you. Okay, at last we have actual control over the camera, so this is cool. And Deus Ex Human Revolution isn't the most technically advanced game, but it does have phenomenal art direction. What it does with its tech is great. It's kind of on the level of, say, Half-Life 2, where even though it's an aging game now, it still looks pretty damn good because the art direction is so good. You can see here we've got this really cluttered room. You know, this feels like a space that's been lived in. And you can go in, you can read these newspapers, and you can check out all sorts of bits and pieces. You can even hack into Megan's computer if you want, but the whole time you're looking around here she's urging you to hurry up and go with her to go and talk to your boss. So you're checking out all this stuff, and it's all kind of interactive. You know, as you're looking at this, she's commenting on the fact that you shouldn't be reading her stuff, which is really cool. So you think, okay, oh, there's an interesting lab out here. It's all very enticing. So let's go and talk to Megan. Maybe we'll have one of those conversations where we can decide what kind of player we're going to be. No, actually, what happens is you're thrown into this weird second cutscene where it's partly interactive. I can still move the camera around and have a look, although only within certain bounds. I can't look behind me, for example. Can't look any further left than that. And my movement has been entirely taken away from me. So this whole section is on rails. You have no control over your speed or at all. It's, again, the developers kind of lacking faith in their own universe. So rather than just leaving it up to the player to discover these characters and the setting and what's going on, instead you're kind of spoon-fed it through dialogue and through this forced sequence that you can't avoid. And just the kind of, I don't know, the fact that you can't look wherever you want and it constrains your viewpoint is so antithetical to what Deus Ex is that it's quite off-putting. And I think a lot of players who were familiar with the original game at this point would be very worried about what Human Revolution was going to be, because so far it seems to be missing the point. And particularly heinous is the fact that it's not just limiting your view to kind of in front of you. Every so often it actually takes control of your camera a bit more, just to make sure that you don't miss the pre-animated scripted sequence that they've clearly spent a lot of time and money on. And you have kind of clumsy scene setting, and like this guy's arm here, where for some reason one arm of his shirt is short so that you can see he's got a bionic arm. That comes into play later in the game, and it's just kind of a clumsy way of going about putting in these little plot beats that will become important later. And what's particularly strange is that this whole sequence, you could have done it with player movement allowed. Like, there's no reason at any point in this that you couldn't just walk through this at your own pace. You know, like the cutscenes in Half-Life 2, for example, where it's entirely scripted and you don't really have much control over what's happening, but you're free to move around and kind of explore that dramatic scene at your own pace and in your own way. It's not that the dialogue is particularly bad, and what you're actually seeing is interesting. You know, a lot of the stuff in all the labs that you're walking past is really cool, but there's a lack of faith in the player, I think. And I don't know whether this was the developer, I think it's Eidos Montreal. I don't know whether it's they're worried that modern gamers have lost some of the skills that we had back in 2000, which I think is when the first game came out. Because Deus Ex didn't hold your hand, it just threw you in and expected you to get on with it. But you know, games back then were a bit like that. You had to figure them out. Games were still figuring out what they were, in fact. These days, people expect more instant entertainment, and they expect to be guided through. You know, you don't want to have to read a manual. You don't expect to get completely stuck or have to remember a million keys. So everything is a bit more streamlined and slick. But I think it makes a misstep in being too worried that players won't get it or that they'll miss stuff. And in fact, if they just had confidence in their own storytelling and to not worry about players missing things, you know, if they're looking the wrong way, who cares? It doesn't matter. The world is still rich enough to engage you.
Did I interrupt something, Jensen?
You fixed that firewall yet?
So this view out the window is kind of a shame because it's where the technology of the engine really falls down. It's not an engine that copes particularly well with a big cityscape like that. And it's a bit like the opening of BioShock, where conceptually it's amazing, but in terms of the technical execution, they just didn't seem to quite be able to pull it off. And it makes you think that maybe they shouldn't have done it in the first place and just kept their scope a little smaller. Now this whole sequence is kind of fantastic. The music's great, the visuals are fantastic, the pacing is really great. And it kind of has musical cues back to the original game, which is all cool. But actually, around about here, we are through our first 5 minutes of the game, and we haven't done anything. All we've actually done is walk around in Megan's office right at the start, read a newspaper, and then we pressed a button which launched into another cutscene. That's not particularly exciting. That's not telling you that this is going to be a great game full of choice and consequence and reactions. But it does become that. It's a cool game, but the first 5 minutes are a big misstep.